So here we are in Parsha Teitzei. And what's going on here in this last book of the 5 books of Moses is that Moses is giving his final words of advice. And in Parsha Teitzei, Moshe taught many commandments and guided the people to have emotional mastery, to know how to go forward in living Torah in day-to-day life. That's what we're going to talk about today, having emotional mastery. So the people needed to learn how to have clear and deliberate responses to emotionally complex situations. As slaves in Egypt, the Jewish people weren't free to say no to Pharaoh, so they had very limited free will. In the desert, the Jewish people lived with God's laws, and they were learning how to say yes to what God wanted for them. But once the Jewish people would leave the desert and live in the land, life was going to be different in many ways. And they wouldn't be slaves to anyone. And they also wouldn't have the clarity that God was showing them in the desert, where when they needed to move, God would lift the cloud up. And when then they would go under the cloud and see where to go. When God wanted them to stop, then the cloud would stop. So then everything was very clear. And in the desert, and when they would come into the land, they would have to make their own decisions in many ways. And our Parsha begins with speaking of war. When you go out in battle against your enemies. And it teaches about how to have war and correct ways to handle things, everything, peace and war, whatever is going on, the Torah is guiding us how to do it. But this talking about when you go out to battle against your enemies, the sages explain that these verses apply to our inner spiritual battle as well. We have inner spiritual battles. And this takes place primarily within ourselves, where there are 2 enemies at war. The empire of the spirit, the Jewish ideals of Torah, and that of ordinary everyday needs, desires, and attitudes. So the struggle between these 2 forces extends throughout our entire lives. What is it that we're doing to know God and serve God? And what is it that we just feel like doing and don't think about a bigger picture at all? So the goals in this conflict are set by the Torah to make godliness a part of our daily lives through learning Torah and keeping God's commandments, and to create homes and families where the atmosphere is harmonious and wholesome, expressing the values of thousands of years of Torah teaching. But our aim is to integrate the divine into our material lives. So that is not to go against the material, but to put it into perspective as we identify how to live being connected to God and Torah in whatever we're doing. So our inner wars are meant to bring us to victory over anything that would want to pull us down into crude materiality and thoughts or actions that lack Torah values and morality. And these material struggles go on with us, within us, often and a lot. Sometimes there are material battles in life, which includes our individual economic struggles, conflicts with neighbors, international politics, encounters with terrorism and war, God forbid. And in addition, there are all kinds of threats to our system. Some of them are very simple. They're issues like convenience and self-indulgence. This is what I want to do. I don't want to be bothered. And others are more complex psychological habits and issues. So in this lifelong situation, we're each called on to go to war. And I have to remember that every person, each one of us is put into the world with a godly purpose. There's something that we're supposed to be doing. So how do we do that? We have to make war against what is going to stop us from doing what we're here to do. Now, the Torah takes into consideration where to make concessions and where not to. There are laws that are black and white, that are laws that have sliding scale, where you can see what is the right thing for me to do. And so we have to work on all this. So very often it's unclear what is the right thing to do or the best thing to do at this time. And we need to look for guidance from Torah mentors who can help us know how to handle subtle borderline issues. How can the spiritual battle of life with its struggles to keep the Torah properly be part of our daily lives? So here we are talking about the struggle to do what is good and right and what we need to do and what is suitable to our purpose. So how do we do that? So it's part of our purpose for being in the world, part of the mastery that we need in order to make this world a place where through our daily victories, we make God known in the world. We each have responsibilities in our lives that we experience as challenges. So how can we make choices that are wise, emotionally developed, and mature? So that's what we're talking about, emotional mastery, how to get that. So Torah doesn't permit us to have whatever we want just because we want it. We can't act toward other people in ways that are careless and harmful to them just to suit our emotional needs. We can't put things together that don't belong together. So this is sometimes the Torah is teaching us that not everything goes together, that you have to know the difference. And two examples of that is that the Parsha is telling us not to plow a field with an ox and a donkey together. That's a mitzvah. Now that's something that if we look at it, we can say an ox is huge and heavy and pulls hard, and donkey is much less so. And when you put them unevenly to work at the same time, it's not going to work properly. So the Torah is telling us through specific mitzvahs that we can understand, or we think we understand, that if it's not going to work out, then you have to think about that in advance and not go there. Another commandment is not to wear a garment of mixed wool and linen sewed together. That's also a very interesting mitzvah, but it's saying that these two don't go together spiritually, physically, just don't do it. And that's something that could be discussed, but it's something that's very often we don't understand why it's like that. But that's the way it is. So there's a certain amount of saying, God is saying, that's the way it is. Okay, so we do it the way God wants. So we're being taught what goes together or what does not go together with something else. Now, each person in each situation has its borders of protection that we have to honor. And understanding and respecting the boundaries and the proper uses of all things, whether it's human, animal, or even vegetable, is the basis of mastery over those emotional urges, which could cause us to violate someone or something else. So there has to be boundaries. This is not good for me. I can't do it this way, or this is not what God wants. We don't eat meat and milk together. It's saying there needs to be separations between things, and we have to know what, when, and how is the right time to do things. So that gives us an emotional mastery, because we have to say, this is fine there, and this is fine there, but not mushed together. So that's something that we have to know. So the battle is between you and you, between our spiritual and our animal soul, to develop a healthy way of dealing with exclusion. Leave that out, put that in. So what are we to take in and what are we to leave out? Now, certain things, certain people, and certain situations don't belong in our lives, or they don't belong with each other. So we have to be able to make decisions and choices. So really what it's about is going to war against whatever is blurring our boundaries. Very important to have boundaries where we know this is the right thing to do, this is what God wants, this is the right thing for me to do, and that is not. And very often it's hard to tell. So how can we tell? Now, often we don't focus on the big picture of our lives, and people, all of us, sometimes get off track because of our inability to take charge of what is important. So emotional mastery is being in charge of our thoughts and emotions, that we ourselves have to become in charge of our thoughts and emotions. So how do we do that? So one key tool is to avoid getting sidetracked. Now, everybody goes through that. And these days where there are phones and messages and all kinds of things going on, people can easily be sidetracked. But we have to train ourselves to focus on the main thing that we've chosen to do in the present. Focusing on one thing at a time. There really is no such thing, by the way, as multitasking. People think that they are, but it doesn't really work that way. You know, sometimes people say, well, I'm on the phone and I'm cooking. And by the way, at the same time, I have a message out to my friend that I need this and that. So could she bring it over to me? And we're all over the place and not really paying attention to anything. And you have to know what you can do. I hate to say it, but sometimes we see young mothers walking with their children, holding their child's hand and talking on the phone with the other. And what is the message? You're not really doing either. If you're holding your child, you should be aware of where your child is. Sometimes people don't realize that their child has walked away. I've seen that too. But if we're with our child, it's important to be giving them attention. How was it on the bus today? How was school today? And talk to them and do one thing and not get sidetracked on the phone. You have to figure out how to do that. And then I've seen people give their children phones. So they're on the phone, their child's on the phone. That's teaching them we're not really together. So we have to think about all this. What is emotional mastery? What is it that is important for us to do? Where do we want to focus our time and place? Now, there are words in Hebrew called ikar and tafel. So ikar is the essential main point. Tafel is less significant. So it's like with an orange. If you want to eat an orange, then the peel is tafel and the orange is ikar. But if you're cooking and you want to take the inside or the outside of the orange peel and scrape it, then the peel becomes ikar and the orange itself becomes tafel. And sometimes you just put it in the refrigerator, somebody else will eat it. But so you have to know which is ikar and which is tafel. And so we need to decide where to place our main attention. So this battle keeps us focusing what is essential rather than on the beep that announces that a text has come in on the phone. And we all know that this is a struggle to keep connecting to what is primary. When we have thoughts of what to do later, and that happens, that something comes up and you say, I must do this. And we're not in a moment of strong focus on what we're doing. We can have a notebook and write down, I have to take care of this later, take care of this later. And when a thought comes up that we can write those things. And if when we finish doing what we're doing, that still seems important to us, then we can do that. But what we need to do is continue to focus on our goals rather than on only tasks to remember. Otherwise, our minds are rolling around. I got to do this. 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 Okay, put them down. Fine. And some of them will turn out to be not so important anyway. But when we're focused, we need to be focused. But before bedtime or at the beginning of the day, we could write down 3 or 4 goals that we want to complete that day. We have to remember that each of us is unique. Nobody is really the same as anybody else, and we each have our own purpose. So we have to think, what is getting me toward my purpose? And those things have to be essential. We need to be flexible to accommodate the many diversions that require our attention. But if at the end of the day, we see that we accomplish those 3 or 4 goals, we're on track. Now, this week's portion, Teitzei, begins with the words, when you go out to war on your enemies, the Lord your God shall deliver them into your hands. Every day we face a battlefield, trying to realize our hopes, goals, and dreams, while various forces within our lives work to defeat us. Just want to pull us aside. And every day we struggle to prioritize our commitments, deciding which things could be put aside and which can't. Sometimes there are situations where it seems that there are several priorities going out during the same time period. So I wanted to tell you something that I learned from my teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, should live and be well. Many years ago, he had a student who was killed by terrorists, a family man. And so Rabbi Ginsburg was their rabbi, their teacher. And so he was very involved in all the things that needed to be done, in comforting the family and getting done what needed to be done. During the same week, his daughter was getting married. So there was a week of Shiva for that family that he was very involved in. There was a week of getting ready for a wedding, his own child that he was involved in. So I called him up and I said, I want to give you condolences on the loss of the student. And I also want to give you mazel tov on your daughter's getting married. So, being the kind of student that I am, I said to him, I have to ask you a question. How are you handling both of these things at the same time? Because it seems like it's at the same time. And Rabbi Ginsburg said to me, there are 2 sides of the heart. On one side, there is crying, and on the other side is joy or laughter. And Rabbi Ginsburg said, when you go to this side, you face it completely. In other words, when he was going to the family that was mourning, he was completely facing that and dealing with that side of the heart. Then he came home and his daughter was excited. She found the gown she's wearing. And then he would turn to this side completely and have joy with her. This is tremendously meaningful because they seem like they're at the same time and they're in the same time frame, but how you deal with it is not in the same time frame exactly. Right now, you have to go to them to help them. Good. Go to them with your whole being, face that side, and feel for them. That you're going toward the side of your heart that has tears, and you cry tears with them, and you're helpful to them, and you do whatever you can. Then you go home, and you turn from there, and you face the side of joy. And you're with your wife and your daughter and your children, and you face them with joy. Now, this is tremendously helpful because what often happens is that without knowing this piece of amazing information, what happens is that people walk around miserable and feel guilty for feeling happy. So they're not really happy. Then they're feeling they shouldn't be happy, they should be miserable, they shouldn't be miserable, they shouldn't be happy, and they don't know what they're doing because instead of focusing on where they are supposed to focus, they are just mixing everything up together. And that's one of the things we're learning in the Torah, that not everything is supposed to be mixed up together. So we have to learn to face the place where we are. Now, sometimes it can come up, that there's grief and a person instead of sitting with it, a person can say, what can I do now? And a person might say, I want to say some Psalms, or I can give somebody a call to ask if they need some help. What could I do? But then they can't just sit in that and walk around in that all the time, because that makes them unable to do the other things in their lives. And we know that this is going on, that a lot of people also keep imagining what is going on over there, you have no idea what's going on there. Whatever's going on there, you're not there. If you feel that it helps to say some Psalms for someone who is in a bad position, or say them, do something, give tzedakah, charity, do something helpful, but don't just go into imagination instead of going into where we really are meant to be, which is in the present, asking, what is my purpose in life right now? If you're not the person who can go rescue that person or save that person, then don't imagine yourself there. If at the same time saying a psalm or giving charity or doing something that you feel will help spiritually, do that. So in every battle, the way to achieve victory is to gain the higher ground, because it says in that pasuk, when you go on, over our enemies, when we go over our enemies. So that means that we have to get the higher ground and not let ourselves be pulled down, but say, what can I do now? Now, we battle not to become stuck in the minutia of daily life. We need to rise above it while keeping an eye on our ultimate goals. Sure, there's minutia. There are things we need to do. You know, if we have dishes we need to wash those dishes, but not feeling pulled down by it. This is what we're focusing on. This is what we're doing at this moment, but keeping the higher picture of saying, now that I have that clean, now I intend to cook and go up above it. Most importantly, we need to remember that it's God who will lead us to victory and help us access our talents to succeed. Now, later in the Parsha, we're commanded, when you build a new house, you shall make a guardrail for your roof. Now, this is a physical guardrail over a flat roof, around a flat roof, to make sure that no one falls from the roof of our house. On the inner level, building a house can mean working on any project, goal, or mission that we want to achieve. So in order to succeed and avoid being dragged into life's many distractions, we need to keep an overview, a guardrail that protects us from them. And the guardrail is there to keep us on track. So what that obviously means is boundaries, that there needs to be a boundary. By setting appropriate boundaries, we can focus on what's important so we don't fall away from what's really ours to do. So it's up to us to build our spiritual selves into the people we want to become. So you have to have a picture. What is it I want to do? What is important to me? What do I need to do? And then how can I build that so that I will be a person who's doing what I'm meant to be doing? And with God's help, we'll succeed. So we were saying that in Egypt, the people were slaves, and a slave can't say no. They didn't have that choice. Only a human being with autonomy and free will says no. And that's precisely what makes a yes so powerful and so meaningful. Saying no to what brings a person down is saying yes to what can elevate you and makes you grow and sanctify your life. In other words, sometimes we say, no, now it's not the time to do this because I need to do that. And that's the ikar. That's the main thing. So it's not easy to fight to be victorious in choosing where to say no and where to say yes. But we have to fight to be who we are here to be. Now, here we are, we're in the month of Elul. the last month of the year, and the new year is right around the corner. Perhaps now would be a good time to make a list of 3 or 4 spiritual goals for this coming year. And this is a time when we can look back and see what we did accomplish, or what behaviors strengthened us, or which things took away from going forward. And this is something that we can work on. If there's things that we know are sidetracks, we have to work on how to avoid those sidetracks, how to make a boundary that will keep us from falling into those sidetracks. If there are things that are good for us and help us accomplish what we need to put that, strengthen that, so it's something that it helps us. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, wanted to explain some Kabbalah about this time of the year. Yom Kippur is not a time, it's a season. Something special is happening then in Yom Kippur, but in this season, heading into Yom Kippur. And we, the farmers of the cosmic soil, need to be in tune with that rhythm. Specifically, there are 13 intense beams of light that shine into the world. These are the 13 midot of rachamim, the 13 measures of compassion, which are capable of healing anything and anyone. So God is giving us this 13 beams of light, which coming from himself, from way far above, and he's spreading those 13 midos of rachamim, those 13 light beams toward us, and they're healing. So this is a time that anybody could be healed, where when we say that's a tough habit, I don't know how to change that one, we can be healed, especially in this time. And we want to be in a state to receive and absorb that light. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman says those 13 beams don't start shining on Yom Kippur. They don't even start on Rosh Hashanah. They're shining for another entire month before Rosh Hashanah, for the entirety of the month that we call Elul. So in this very month, the 13 beams of light are shining into us. This is a month of turning to God. It's every day for the whole month. It's an easy time to turn to God. But it's so special. So how could we go to work? How could we eat? How could we spend these days as though they were just another day of the week, when the 13 beams of mercy are shining us? And so Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi tells us the story of the king in the field. There's a parable of a king who's returning to his capital city, and all the people in the city come out to greet the king in the field. So he's on the way and he's in the field. He's not in the palace. He's coming from wherever he was through the field on the way to the palace. And he sees each person and he receives each one with a friendly countenance and greets all of them with a smile. I have to remember, we're talking about God. You could say, how could you greet everyone if there's thousands of people, there are millions of people there? God does not have that problem. God can focus on each of us uniquely and individually. So we have an opportunity to turn to God at this time, and God gives us a smiling face and greets us in a loving way. Then, once he returns to his palace, only the most special individuals can come to see him, and only with permission. And the palace is Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. For those times, you have to get yourself into a certain state of mind. You've got to be there, and then you will relate. So it happens when you're with other Jews and the shofar is blowing, or you're fasting and beating your chest on the Day of Atonement, at one-ment. But in Elul, the king is in the field. And how do we find him? You find him in that place where we go inside ourselves to break the coarse soil of our souls and to plow in there and to plant and to nurture seeds of wisdom and beautiful deeds. So when we go, what does it mean the king is in the field? We just can go into ourselves, connect to God inside ourselves. And you show up as you are without special garments or roles. You just show up. So we show up and go to the king who's there with us. This month is an opportunity. But I really like that in terms of everything that we're talking about. How can we show up for God? What right now is it that I need to do that is showing up for God? Now, when we say Elul, the month of Elul, we say Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. The connection is profound. And God's smile to us is the 13 midot, the 13 attributes of compassion, bringing to the surface the intense love between God and his people. So here the work is to turn to God, to prepare for the new spiritual year that begins on Rosh Hashanah. So right now our work is to turn to God. Each day is like a holiday. And yet each day is a day that we live our normal lives. Elul is an opportunity to live connection with God in whatever we do. But that is really what we're working on all together. To have emotional mastery means that we're able to turn to God and say, what can I do to make my connection with God now? What is it? How can I make this moment valuable? What is the opportunity that I have at this time that connects me with God from the inside, with our whole being? So living in this special, profound present in Elul and at all the times, really, full of God's life, we have faith that we can change what didn't work in this past year and go with what brings transformation. So in doing our work to make this a godly world, a world where we're connecting to God and to what God wants from us, and what is our purpose in doing all of this connection, we go through transformation, but we also transform the world to a place of light and godliness. And this is the victory of these days, bringing us to a new year of purpose and connection. And that's what we are here to do. So may that be so for each and every one of us. I mean, we have a blessed year.